border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
Green keeps it himself, looking for the end zone. Isaiah Green, touchdown! Quarterback keeper for 17, and Marshall back up by 2 touchdowns.
Story toward Jackson, got separation to the 20, to the 10, and he will go. Lucky Jackson from 54 yards out. After a Western Kentucky record 16 catches a week ago, he gives the Hilltoppers the early lead today.
Pressure off the edge. Screen delivers. What a catch, Levias, who brings it in. Armani Levias to the house. Touchdown, Marshall.
And will 46 come on the field? Yes, he will. Corey Munson, the freshman, the true freshman out of Warner Robins, Georgia. As long as 48. This will be from 52 yards. From the far hash mark, John Haggerty, the punter, will hold. Jared Nash will snap it. It's definitely long enough. It is good! Unbelievable. The true freshman, Corey Munson, hammers it home from 52 yards. What a clutch kick there to win the ball game.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Trace and KD with you once again. We're going to wrap up and give you some thoughts on the NFL draft. We'll talk about some signings from the guys from the teams and snubs and all that kind of thing. And then towards the latter half of this episode, Trace has got some data that he's going to throw at us on a totally unrelated topic than the draft. I mean, it might include that a little bit, like indirectly, but this is something he's been working on. I don't know. I guess he got motivated to throw together some data and, squash a rumor. So we'll see.
Quarantine thoughts.
Okay, there you go. Deep quarantine thoughts. So we'll see where this takes us. I have no prior knowledge of what he's going to talk about. I do know it's Marshall related and it's football related and stuff like that. So I have a good feeling that I'll be able to intelligently discuss this idea with him. But as far as preparation, I have none. So you and I are hearing this together for the first time. So let's talk about that NFL draft, Trace. Just wrapped up yesterday. Since the draft wrapped up, the last pick in the 7th round was done. It was like a flurry of unrestricted free agent signings, undrafted free agent signings. And, we keep watching and hitting refresh to seeing is anybody else from Western, anybody from Marshall going to get that deal. But before we get there, let's talk about the draft. First 4 rounds, nobody taken of any consequence that we really care about other than maybe the guys that your own personal favorite team drafted. I have some thoughts on that as well, but that's a time. That's an episode for another time and place. So let's fast forward to round 5, pick number 14, the 159th pick overall of the New England Patriots. They selected Marshall kicker Justin Rowasser, who was the first specialist off the board in the entire draft. First kicker, first punter, long snapper. Whatever else you qualify as a specialist, he was the first one off the board, period. Come to a surprise, probably to a lot of fans. And I know a lot of Patriots fans weren't expecting a kicker to be taken in round 5. I personally did not think that it was out of the question that Rowasser would get drafted. Was I surprised that it was as high as it was? Yeah, absolutely. Am I equally as pumped for it? Yeah, you better believe it. Kid's a hard worker. He's got the big leg, got the accuracy. Followers of this rivalry know that firsthand. And I don't know. I think he'll do well. He's a cold weather guy. He's from New York. He kicked in Huntington. The weather's not always nice in Huntington. Kicked in Rhode Island. So, I think he'll fit in up there in Foxborough. And, we'll see what the next level holds for him. But what do you think about that pick, round 5, being so early for New England, Trace?
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised that he got drafted that early, not because he wasn't good enough, but just because the last few years it's been like a nonstop process of wondering if a Marshall guy is going to get drafted. And since 2015, that hadn't happened. So you were kind of skeptical, even though like you knew these guys are good enough, you think, to make a roster. But like that was really good to see him. I mean, New England has picked a lot of Marshall guys over the years. I mean, they have a pretty good track record of that, or not necessarily picked them, but they've had a lot of successful Marshall guys in the past and everything. So it's cool that they're keeping that connection alive. It's cool. It's really, really cool to see that he was the first kicker taken in the entire draft. That's a really good honor there. I mean, we know how good he was last year. Obviously, he's the 2018 or 2019 Special Teams Player of the Year and Conference USA. And just, I mean, of course, this rivalry knows how good he was in that Moonshine Throwdown game. That was just some epic stuff there. And, I mean, like you said, I mean, he's used to kicking in pretty cold conditions, and, he's going to get a lot of that in the NFL, playing in Foxborough and playing, the AFC East, the Buffaloes and your kind of weird weather like that. So I think he'll fit in well. The Patriots were definitely needing a kicker because they just released Gostowski not that long ago, and like they've been kind of shuffling kickers in and out since then. But so hopefully he's their guy. I mean, it'd be cool to see. I mean, Corey Vedvik had some flashes last year. But he ultimately, I think, got cut, and I'm not sure where he is now. But hopefully, Rohrwasser ends up, staying put for a while. It would be cool to see. But I think that was a great, great get for them, and I'm really happy that he got drafted. Happy for him, and obviously, it looks good for Marshall. Just anytime you can get any your players drafted, it looks good on you as a program. So that's good stuff all around the board there.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of points about this pairing here, and at Rohrwasser and New England. New England, number one, not a stranger to Marshall players and the draft.
Nope.
Several years ago, they drafted one all-time great, Troy Brown, in the 8th round before the draft was limited to 7 rounds. So way back in like 93 or something like that, took Troy Brown in the 8th round. And then, fast forward a few years, Lee Smith comes out and is drafted by the Patriots. And I believe I saw somebody tweet this. I can't remember who it was, but I believe that Lee Smith was also picked number 159.
I think so.
To the Patriots, which is odd. So, yeah. And then fast forward a few more years, the Patriots select Aaron Dobson with the 59th pick in round 2, the year he came out. So there's a lot of familiarity with Bill Belichick and the New England organization with Marshall players. And I heard an interview a little bit ago, just a quick snippet, minute or so long, talking about Bill Belichick talking about picking Rohrwasser, and he mentioned that they had viewed something like 250 some of his kicks, dating all the way back to like, I don't know when. But that just goes to show you that these NFL teams really do their research. And if it's somebody like a kicker, think about how far back that is. When you talk about only attempting 21 field goals in the season last year, and they had looked at over 250 kicks total. Just think how far back you have to go to see that. Now, of course, that may not all be game kicks. So there could be some practice kicks and things like that as well. But still, that's a lot of kicks that you're looking at. And that's for a kicker. Now, imagine what you're looking at for a wideout or a quarterback oh, my Lord, I can only imagine. So, the other thing I want to talk about is what kind of pressure do you think that falls upon Rohrwasser now, given that he was selected to New England and he is now the third in a lineage of 2 unbelievably all-time great kickers. You got Steven Gostkowski, who essentially took over for Adam Vinatieri, and of course you have Adam Vinatieri. So, for like 20 years, these guys have had Hall of Fame kickers. Yeah. And now Justin Rohrwasser steps into that and has to fill those shoes. Patriots fans they're a little spoiled when it comes to kickers. So do you think that adds any pressure to him, or do you think it ultimately doesn't bother him?
Well, I don't know if it personally bothers him or not, but I think it definitely is a very pressurized situation. It's not just because of the lineage of kickers that they've had. It's not just that. It's also because when you're trying to break into the NFL as a kicker, it's completely up to whether you make kicks or not. Like if if you're a quarterback and you miss a couple throws, you're not going to get released. Or if you're a running back and you miss the hole and only get a yard, you're not going to get released. If you miss field goals, you're going to get released. Like it's just that simple.
Yeah. that week.
that week, or the day after the game, you're out. So, like, there is a ton of pressure as far as that goes, and that's what kind of makes me weary, just because, I mean, he's a rookie coming in, and, rookies, very few rookies go out there and have all-time great years immediately. I mean, unless you're like Randy Moss or somebody. I mean, it's hard to do. So, I mean, with kickers, my Lord, the margin for error is paper thin. We've seen that a lot with kickers. I mean, they go out and miss two field goals in a game, they're gone the next day. It's just utter madness sometimes how they go through kickers so quickly. But, I mean, they drafted him pretty high for a specialist and pretty high for a kicker, obviously the first one taken. So they must have faith in him that he can get the job done, and I think he can get the job done. So hopefully.
Yeah, good luck to Justin Rowasser. We'll all be watching, of course. Just one more reason to root for the Patriots. A lot of folks do not like the Patriots because they've won so much over the years, but this is a good reason to cheer for them, I guess, at least in a field goal situation. Maybe you can cheer for them to go 0-16, but Justin to have 4 field goals a game, that'd be all right by me too. But
yeah.
All right, so let's fast forward a couple more rounds. We get to the 7th round. Drafts winding down. Pick number 29, 243 overall. Tennessee Titans come up 1 pick after the Green Bay Packers, I might add, and they select Marshall defensive back Chris Jackson. And I got to admit, I was a little surprised. I thought Chris Jackson would get an opportunity maybe as an undrafted free agent, but good for him to get that name called and head to Tennessee. So what are your thoughts on Chris Jackson and Tennessee?
Yeah, much like you. I mean, I was really surprised with the pick or the fact that he got drafted. I mean, it's not that he was one of those that I thought that would probably get an undrafted free agent deal. I kind of felt like he would be one of those people, but I guess they really must have really liked his measurables and his, stuff like that, and the combine and all the workouts he's done. They must have really liked that. But I mean, my whole thing with Chris Jackson is through his entire career at Marshall is just the fact that he's inconsistent, or he was inconsistent. I mean, I think every Herd fan that knows football would say that he was inconsistent. Now, there were times where he was the clear-cut number 1 corner, and I mean, he for most times he was that at Marshall in 4 years. But like he had a very interesting career. I mean, think back to when he was a freshman in 2016. I don't know if I've ever seen a player more maligned than he was that year. I mean, but he was a true freshman having to play, and he didn't need to play that year. They should have just redshirted him, but they didn't. They didn't have that luxury because they needed him. And then, of course, 2017 and 18. He was back. He was second team all conference both of those years. Made some good plays and stuff. I remember he had a really good game against FAU in 2018. He had a pick 6 against Miami, Ohio in 2017, and moments like that thrown in. And then last year he was actually first team all conference last year, I think, which was kind of surprising to me because I thought his 2 years prior were actually better than his senior year. But I mean, I'm happy for him. I mean, it's a cool experience. Obviously, he'll get a chance to see it, try to prove himself, and it's another good little nod for Marshall to have another player drafted because, I mean, I was looking at a graphic today, and some pretty notable teams had less draft picks than Marshall did in this draft this year. So, I mean, that looks pretty good, and Marshall hasn't had multiple players selected in a single draft since 2003, so we're talking 17 years.
Yeah.
So it's cool. I mean, it's a cool thing to have a couple guys drafted, especially since there hadn't been anybody drafted since Swag Roberts 5 years ago. That's good. And a lot of people, and I know we talked about it, and a lot of people on Twitter talked about it, that Doc hadn't had hardly anybody drafted of his own players. So it's cool to see that too. Hopefully they can keep having success in that regard. And this draft, they literally matched the total number of Doc recruits that have been drafted in his entire career. They matched it with this draft. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good there. So happy for both of them, but it was a little surprising though, honestly, for Jackson.
Yeah. And I don't know if I know you caught it, but I don't know if a lot of our listeners might have caught it. But, when he was drafted, he was listed as a safety and not a corner.
Right,
now, he played corner at Marshall, but now in the NFL, he was, listed as a safety. So maybe that actually helped because, look, Chris is a big guy. He's an athletic guy. So he's got the measurables you like. He's got the speed you like. And you take a little bit of the pressure off him by not having to go maybe one-on-one with an NFL receiver. He gets to kind of play that center field type role and do those play the safety position. And maybe that's a little bit more indicative of his skill set, and you'll see a higher level of success from Chris at the next level. But a lot is up in the air, and a lot remains to be seen. So, I mean, congratulations to the guy. I was just a little surprised. I did think he would get an opportunity. Like I said, I just did not expect to hear his name called, but I'm really glad he did. One other note that we've got to talk about is after the end of the draft and all the free agent signings were floating around there, I've only seen one so far for Marshall, and that is linebacker Amari Cobb signed an undrafted free agent deal to head to Kansas City and play for the Super Bowl champion Chiefs. Amari Cobb is a big guy. I think he's like 6'4", 220 some pounds. I mean, he's big. He's chiseled out of granite, and he knows how to lay the wood. So not surprising that he got an opportunity. And really not surprising that he got an opportunity so quickly. What do you like about Omari Cobb and how he may fit into the Kansas City defense?
I like a lot about Amari Cobb, for sure. I mean, I think especially for Marshall and Group of 5 programs, they kind of every single time it seems like there's a player that comes out of one of the Group of 5 program, for the draft, it's always, oh, well, they're undersized. They're undersized. It's almost every single player at every single position for any Group of 5 team that has a guy come out in the draft. You can't say that about Amari Cobb. Mm-mm. You could actually say that he might be a little too big for that position. I mean, 6'4", a 6'4" linebacker, there's just not many of those going around. And, most linebackers prototypically are around 6 foot because, they're a little lower to the ground and they can move a little better. But he's 6'4" and he can move. So there's no question that I think he can make it on that team, especially because the Chiefs over the last couple of years have been really needing to improve and boost their defense up. I mean, last year, obviously, it turned out to be decent enough to win the Super Bowl, but the year before, it was downright atrocious. So the Chiefs really need to boost that defense up. And, I mean, Amari Cobb, if he can get a chance, I think he's definitely capable of making the team. I don't know how much he would play because, I mean, they have guys in mind already, and he's an undrafted free agent, but we've seen it before. A lot of undrafted free agents have had success. I mean, Neville Hewitt's an NFL starter, and he was an undrafted free agent, and we've seen a lot of that with other guys, not from Marshall, too. So I think Cobb's definitely a prototypical, sort of prototypical size for a linebacker, even though he's a little taller than most linebackers. But I mean, that could work in his favor because he's just so big and physical. So I'd like to see how that plays out, and I think it could go well for him and the Chiefs.
I mean, being that big, maybe you think there's an opportunity there where they try to make him into a hybrid linebacker / pass rusher.
Right.
But I don't know. It all depends on, in the NFL, it's one thing above all other things, and that's speed. Your strength never comes into play if you don't have the speed to get to where you need to be. Yep. And you're fooling yourself if you think it's not about speed, especially when you're talking about pass rushing. So you can be as strong as an ox, but if you can't get your body to where it needs to be in order to allow that strength to be a benefit to you, well, then it's, of no use. So perhaps that 6'4" frame is a little bit enticing, and they're like, hey, if this kid's got the speed, maybe we can get him out on the edge, play linebacker, maybe be a little bit of a pass rusher, hybrid type guy. We'll just see. But it reminds me of, a long time ago, I saw on Twitter earlier that the Kansas City Chiefs had another herd linebacker way back when off of that 99 team, Andre O'Neal. So this is, I know we're talking a lifetime ago for a lot of folks. It's 20-some years ago, but it's just wild. 20-some years later, you got a herd linebacker going to the Kansas City Chiefs on an undrafted free agent contract. So we'll see how it works out for Amari Cobb. Congratulations to him. Now, as far as all the other guys that we thought might get a deal, they still may. It just hasn't happened as we record. So, I'm still looking for guys like Levi Brown to get an opportunity. I cannot believe his phone wasn't ringing off the hook like immediately. I mean, you're talking about a multi-year all-conference offensive lineman center, by the way. Those guys are generally at a premium. Yeah. And he's just an all-around great football player, the type of guy you want in your locker room, the type of guy that has the personality to go along with the talent to instantaneously become a fan favorite. So, we saw that in Huntington on a smaller level. Now you get that in the NFL when you're in front of a massive fan base and tens of thousands of fans on a weekly basis. And this is the type of guy that fans just fall in love with. I mean, he's just such a jokester and a goofster, and then he'll go out there and just dominate a game from the center position. So I cannot believe that his opportunity hasn't come yet. I'm sure that it will. I mean, how can it not? Also, guys that I'm kind of surprised we did not see get a call yet. Channing Hames, Marshall defensive lineman. Marquise Couch, Marshall defensive lineman. Matthew Beardall, great multi-all-conference type long snapper. Western Kentucky's got, Lucky Jackson. I've seen wideouts getting deals from schools I've never even heard of, and I can't believe Lucky Jackson hasn't gotten that call yet. Ty Story is a guy I thought might get an opportunity as well. He had a really good season after a couple of so-so productive type years at Arkansas. He really helped turn around that Western program last year to 9 wins plus 6 in the win column from the year before. Who else are we talking about here? Oh, Miles Pate, great offensive lineman from Western Kentucky. You can never have too many linemen, just like we were talking about with Levi. Miles is a guy I really thought would be a fast mover, as far as getting an opportunity. Coco Darden, a very productive hybrid type linebacker who could play linebacker, maybe scooch back into that safety type role. These guys, that bring flexibility in this day and age of the NFL, flexibility is key on a defense. So, I still think that some of those guys, if not all of them, will ultimately get an opportunity. It might not be an undrafted free agent deal. Maybe it's just a rookie camp invite, but you can't really start to nail that down until the NFL and life basically gets back to normal. As long as we're social distancing and activities are basically nil, you're really going to see these smaller school guys, struggle to get that opportunity. But once everything opens back up, I think you'll see teams bring dudes in droves to see who they missed out on. And it wouldn't surprise me if guys like Levi and Miles Pate get multiple opportunities with multiple teams, to try to catch a landing spot. But all I can say to him, I know you got some things to say too, but guys, keep your heads up. It's a bummer. We all wanted to see you guys get drafted, and it's even a bigger bummer because we all wanted to see you get that unrestricted or undrafted free agent deal like immediately, just so we could start rooting for you. We're never going to stop rooting for you, even if that phone call never comes. Believe me, we're fans of all of you for eternity, but stay positive, keep working out, try to stay in shape because you never know when that phone's going to ring. Coronavirus has just done a number on a lot of things, and unfortunately, small school athletes are paying the premium for that because of the lack of pro days and the lack of exposure. So, it's just a bad deal all the way around. But keep working out, stay positive. I know it's hard. You'll get your opportunity. What can you say about these guys that, quote unquote, have been snubbed so far, Trace?
Yeah, maybe it's just a little early. Maybe they're still, it could go multiple days as to them picking undrafted free agents. Maybe it's just a longer process. But, a lot of those guys, I'm surprised you didn't see something about them signing like 5 minutes after the draft was over. Some of them, it's kind of crazy. Even the Western guys, like you said, we're all pretty familiar with them, even in Marshall fans. A lot of those guys, especially Lucky Jackson, an extremely productive guy. And maybe he's not the prototypical NFL wide receiver qualities, maybe not, but I think sometimes they go too much into the science of the things. Because I think for me, I know there's more to it than this, but I want to know what you can do on the field when the lights are on. What do you do?
Yeah,
and Lucky Jackson, yes, Lucky Jackson performs. And this is a completely unrelated topic, but Tim Tebow, when the lights went on, he performed as good as anybody in college football history. Same thing in the NFL. He managed to make the most out of his abilities because when the lights are on, he's a gamer. And there's just guys that are like that. And I think a lot of these guys, if they got the opportunity, they could prove that. And then, looking at Levi Brown a little bit more, he's one of the best Marshall centers of all time, for sure. I was thinking back to the most recent center that they had before him that got a chance. That was Chris Jaspers. He got drafted. He was an undrafted free agent in 2015 and, didn't make it long term, but like he got a chance. And then Levi Brown, I think he's every bit as good, if not better than Chris Jaspers. So I think he should get a chance. No doubt about it. Now, I don't know exactly his, what his measurables are and all that. And I don't know how that he stacks up with the rest of the draftees.
Roll the tape. Look at the numbers. Look at all the first team, or second team, all conference selections. Look at all the production. Look at the lack of mistakes. I mean, the guy, in 4 years or however many years he played, I don't ever remember a bad snap. I mean, I don't remember it off the top of my head, and that's pretty rare because usually when you think of certain players, receivers or running backs, like you'll think of a big fumble here and there for running back, or you'll think of a big drop for a receiver here or there, or quarterback, a big interception. I can't think of one bad snap off the top of my head from Levi Brown. So the guy's just, like I said, just a gamer. I think for sure he needs to get a chance. And those other Marshall guys too. Channing Haynes, I think he's just a beast of an athlete. I think he's got a real good chance. Marquise Couch, another big physical guy. I think he could do it as well. So I think a lot of those guys will get some phone calls coming up, hopefully. But I'm surprised a lot of these people, both sides, Marshall and Western, haven't been signed way quicker than they will end up, hopefully. Yeah, and I don't want to diminish the position that some guys play, but there is always a premium on offensive linemen and defensive linemen.
Yep.
The NFL doesn't care where you come from. They don't care as long as you can help them win a football game. So you have to think that Miles and Levi and Channing and Marquise are all going to get an opportunity. And, it's just a bummer that wide receiver was one of the deepest wide receiver drafts in a long time. So that doesn't help Lucky's cause. And, but again, if you can help a team win a football game, if you can get in there and make the most of your reps and just get something on tape, that will help you get your next opportunity if your first one isn't the one. But again, just try to stay positive, keep working out. We'll do obviously all we can to help get your names out there, but we're just, small fish in a very, very, very large pond, but we will keep banging the drum for Western and Marshall football players to get an opportunity until there's no more drum left to beat. Switching gears, Trace. I am quite intrigued about what you have in store for us. Can you at least tell me what we're talking about? Like, what is this whole experiment, this whole collection of data that you have? What does it deal with? Because I think I kind of know, but I'm not really sure.
Well, it stems from the fact that I've been watching a lot of old Marshall games because I have nothing else to do with my life right now. It stems from that. It stems from me watching a lot of that Mac era stuff. And I've heard a lot of discussion and people talking about comparing conferences. Now, it's unfair to compare Conference USA before realignment because that's just a whole different animal in its own right. But people want to compare this new version of Conference USA, this realigned version from 2014 onwards. That's just what I'm calling it, 2014, because 2013 you still had several of those would-be American teams in it. But 2014 onwards, it was all the Conference USA teams that are in it now, basically. Comparing this version of Conference USA from 2014 to now to the MAC, the version of the MAC when Marshall was in the MAC from 97 to 04. And I've got some pretty good things I've figured out about this because I've had my opinion on it has been pretty solid over the years. I've been pretty adamant with my opinion on it. And I think these stats kind of help back me up a little bit. And I actually tweeted out a couple of things the other day about it real subtly. Well, not real subtly because there was like a couple different tweets, parts of it. But I'll mention that too. But yeah, it's just comparing two different conferences, two different eras of two different conferences.
All right. So what are we comparing? Are we comparing Marshall's competitiveness, the overall conference strength from top to bottom? Are you talking recruiting? What are you talking?
Yeah, it's not really about Marshall, how good they are in each conference. It's really not as much about them as it is just how are the overall conferences, how they compare.
So your argument is essentially that the current Conference USA from 2014 to present is a less competitive conference than the MAC of the late 90s?
Well, I think my stance is that I just think that the MAC from 97 to 04 is at least a little better than Conference USA now, if not marginally or moderately better.
Okay, so you're not necessarily calling new Conference USA or the current Conference USA a weaker conference. You're just basically saying that there is no marked difference between the two quality-wise.
Well, there kind of is and there kind of isn't. It's just it kind of just depends on how you look at it. But I mean, the things I wrote down, I think they're pretty juicy. So I'll let y'all decipher whatever you think about it.
All right, so make up your own mind. Screw it. Let's get to the data because the more I try to figure out what we're doing, the more confused I get.
Well, that makes two of us. I'm just kind of, this is quarantine thoughts here, people. So. All right. Well, the whole thing started with me looking at Power 5 or Power Conference wins. That's what it all started with, because I always watch back all of these old Marshall games and I hear these broadcasters say, well, the MAC's beaten Penn State this year and the MAC beat Minnesota this year and the MAC beat this team and that team. And they show all kinds of stats about the Power Conference teams that the MAC used to beat. And I was thinking, well, Lord, that's no comparison. Conference USA rarely ever gets Power 5 wins now. So I looked at that at first. That's just one of my big bullet points I looked at. And I tweeted this actually the other day, so it's kind of a pretty huge difference actually. But there's one little caveat to it that lessens it a little bit, but it's still a pretty significant difference. So the MAC from 97 to 04 had a combined 38 wins over Power Conference teams during that stretch. Now the caveat to that is there were 9 of those wins were against Temple when they were in the Big East, and Temple was just horrible then. But even at that's still 29 wins. I mean, that's a lot more. It will be a lot more than what I say Conference USA has. Conference USA from 2014 up until now, which is obviously just through 2019, 12 wins against the Power Conference teams.
Okay,
now
that's still 6 years of Conference USA versus 8 years of the MAC.
I'm going to say that.
12 minus whatever 28 is, you'd still need to double your win total plus some in the next 2 years.
Oh, I'm not finished. Trust me. I was getting there. So I made the note after 6 years in the MAC, after 6 years in the Power Conference wins, it was still 27. So, I mean, That's still over double than what the MAC Conference USA has. And I went further into that, actually. I really went far into this one. So the MAC, all of those wins they had against the Power 5, those Power 5 teams combined had a 38% winning percentage. I mean, that's, whatever. And 3 of those teams finished ranked 17th or better in the final AP poll of that particular season. And then the MAC also beat 8 Power 5 teams during that stretch with winning records that finished the year with a winning record. The Conference USA side of things, their wins over the Power Conference opponents, their combined winning percentage is only 32%, and none finished that season ranked, and they only beat 1 of those Power 5 teams. Only 1 of them had a winning record. So the quality of teams, the quality of Power Conference teams the MAC were beating was obviously higher, and they had way more, and it's higher quality. So as far as that goes, there's no comparison there.
I'm not trying to disparage everything that you're saying, but I have to offer some thoughts as we talk about them.
Shoot.
Okay, so this is ridiculously high media deal budgets in the MAC era. So there were, I don't know. I'm not going to say that the scales were tipped in the other direction because the Power 5 teams were always tougher. They're always recruiting better players, quote unquote, are always going there, whatever you want to say, but it's just not as bad now. As it was, it's just not as bad then. I don't think it's way worse now. The disparity of haves and have-nots is exponentially larger. So I think it was a little bit easier for some of those players that fell through the cracks to land at places like Marshall or Bowling Green or, Akron or Toledo, because this is pre-social media. This is, the internet was around, but let's face it, you weren't jumping on 24/7 Sports or Rivals or whatever to, see what was going on in recruiting. So the playing field was still a little bit more level. Coaches still had to be old school recruiters. They had to go find guys a little bit more than just circle a database and, oh, well, this guy looks good. Let me watch some film. Oh, well, great. I can find this kid without ever leaving my office, and then extend him an offer. Well, you really couldn't do that in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I think that lends itself to helping teams in the MAC recruit a higher quality of athlete.
That's probably there's definitely some truth to that. But I mean, everybody says now, though, the athletes are better than they were 20 years ago. So, I mean, even if you're not getting quite as many of the quote unquote blue chip players from these, if you're not stealing a lot of these players from the big time schools, I mean, you're still getting what the modern era perceives as better athletes, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that there are not better athletes. By and large, like the majority of athletes are better now than they were 20 years ago. But the stud athletes, so to speak, that fell through the cracks that the coaches didn't go find because they couldn't go look at 10 high schools on one recruiting trip. So they didn't go see a Darius Watts because they had to just go to that high school, and that wasn't worth. I don't know where he went to high school. I'm just using that as an example. So you don't go into Hurricane, West Virginia, where you're from, and look at one high school when you can go to where I live just outside of Tampa and you can see freaking 24 high schools, and a ton more talent. So I'm just saying I think smaller schools had a little bit easier of a time trying to be competitive. It wasn't easy and it wasn't fair, but compared to now, like I said, a coach can never leave his office and see all the film he wants to see on a guy and give him an offer before he talks to him, looks at him. I mean, he can check his grades and do all that stuff, and without ever having to leave his office. But anyway, I like this. Next point. This is fun.
Next point. Okay, these are
wait a minute. I'm not going to be the designated naysayer, by the way.
No, go ahead.
When I think of things, I just want to be able to talk about them. So next point. This is good.
Hey, if we can turn this into a debate, a first take or undisputed, we'll do it. We'll do it. All right, so these points are a little less in depth, I guess you could call it, but they're still pretty telling, I think, some of them. So, okay, I was just looked up for both conferences. I looked up the overall winning percentage of all the teams in the conferences from those particular eras, 97 to 04 and 14 to 19, and these are almost identical. Now, keep in mind, it's also a 6 to 8 year difference. Obviously, like you said, the 2 years gap, the difference, but the MAC's overall winning percentage as a conference from 97 to 04 was 46%. Conference USA's overall winning percentage from 14 to 19 is 47%. So that's basically a push there.
That's close enough.
Yeah, it's close enough. And if you go 2 more years, Conference USA likely is not going to improve on that. So it's probably going to be a little bit lower or right at 46%.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much a push. Another little thing I looked at is the MAC during that time had 5 teams finish in the top 25 in the final AP top 25. Conference USA's only had 2, Marshall and Western. Those are the only 2 teams that have finished in the final AP top 25. Now, a lot of that's probably the perception issue that the group of 5 has. We've talked about how unfair it gets. A lot of that might be that. But the one thing that I will say that the MAC actually does have, or the Conference USA seems to have a pretty decent advantage over the MAC in, is draft picks. Now, it's not as much overall as it is comparing the first 6 years to the 6 years, comparing an equal amount of years. So Conference USA's draft picks from 2015 to 2020, including this year, is 51 total. And the MAC from 98 to 05, obviously the years that Marshall would have been in it still, is 55. But after the first 6 years, the MAC only had 37. So 51 to 37 difference in the 6 years. They got a lot more picks after those couple years of extra. But so Conference USA looks like they have a pretty good advantage in that aspect. But I mean, other than that, I don't really. I just don't think the Conference USA is a better conference, or at least I don't think it is now. I mean, it's just the way that they were going. I mean, we've nagged about it. They went the direction of trying to get the small or the young up and coming programs in the big TV market areas that don't have any history, that not have kind of smaller fan bases. They didn't go after the teams that had a genuine, football history and tradition and, solid fan bases. So, I mean, they dug their they made their bed, they got to lay in it. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, Conference USA's got some good programs, but I mean, I'm not saying my whole thing isn't to say that the MAC was like the SEC or anything, because neither conference was anywhere near that. But I really believe that, if not significantly, that the MAC from 97 to 04 is at least moderately better than Conference USA is over the last 6 years.
I think to me, it's basically even, because I could probably take a list of each team, like you take the MAC and the final standings every year, 97, 98, 99, 2000, all the way up until Marshall left. And you do the same thing with the Conference USA's overall standings from 2014 till now. And I bet you it would be eerily similar, that you could start crossing off teams like, oh, great, they had 3 teams that went 2-10. Oh, and they had another 3 teams that went 5-7. And then at the top you've got, they had 3 or 4 teams as a conference that went 8-5 or better. Yep. I bet it would be eerily similar if you were to invest the time to print all that out and start crossing them off. 97 versus 2014. I bet it would, because it's not just like a top to bottom quality conference. I mean, there were some pretty hot garbage teams in the MAC.
Yeah.
Back in the late 90s. Buffalo, they were very, very hot garbage. I mean, they were everybody's homecoming game. They were never really competitive that I can recall.
No.
But so the quality of program, or conference, top to bottom, to me, at the very best, it's a push. And on any given year, Conference USA could have that one team that jumps up and just surprises you. Like FAU a couple of years ago, they were really good. Nobody thought they were going to be as good as they were. They were a dangerous team, let's face it. And North Texas a few years ago was a pretty dangerous team. And nobody really expected them to be that tough. The 2014 Marshall team was really, really tough. And I don't think a lot of, outsiders outside of Huntington really knew they were going to be as good as they were. But the same thing holds true in the MAC. I mean, Toledo was generally pretty good year in and year out. Western Michigan strung together a few good years. They were tough. Miami, Ohio, and Marshall were basically it. Ohio was a run-of-the-mill team. Northern Illinois was a run-of-the-mill team. Ball State, terrible. Bowling Green, terrible. Buffalo, terrible. Akron, terrible. Kent State was one of those fringe teams where they might be good one year, and then they would be just absolutely terrible the next year. So, who are those teams in Conference USA? I think we all know who they are. You have your players every year that go in and they think, okay, these teams are going to be the ones that are going to compete for the conference. And 1 or 2 more might surprise us and we can throw them into the conversation. But right off the bat, you can give me the usual suspects. If the season started right now, you could tell me who doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning the Conference USA title. You know who they are. Yeah. And so does everybody else listening to this podcast. So to say that it's better conference, I don't know. Equal, yeah, at best to me. Your data might say different, but putting on the film and an eye test, I don't know. I think it's the same.
Well, that's what I said. I said to you, you said at best. I said at worst. I think it's equal. I don't think. I just don't see how anybody could say that the MAC at that point is lesser. I mean, you could say equal if you want, but lesser, no. Sorry, no. I just can't give it that.
No, and the most telling stat that you said is the Power 5 wins. That's ungodly. And of course, probably a bunch of those wins were. Well, I don't know. Marshall, I don't know how many Power 5 wins Marshall had in that run.
Okay, I was going to get to that, actually. I was going to get to one point in particular, but Marshall had a few of those, obviously. They had South Carolina, they had Clemson, they had Temple, they had Kansas State. I think that might be it.
But that's 4.
And then they were extremely close in several others, but you can't count that.
Yeah, extremely close isn't in the win column. So
No.
if they won 38 games, what'd you say? 38 as a conference? Is that what it was?
38. Yep.
38 as a conference. So Marshall basically accounted for 10% of those wins. And you're talking about a conference with, I don't know how many teams at the time, 14, 12, whatever.
Yeah.
So we just talked about how many of those teams were hot garbage. So that means really that Marshall didn't win any more games against the Power 5 than any of your other top MAC teams or middle of the pack MAC teams. Now it would be a telling stat if Marshall had like 15 wins over Power 5 teams of the MAC's 38. That would be something different.
Yeah. Well, listen to this. This year in particular, I think out of the whole time Marshall was in the MAC, that this was by far the best year the MAC had. 2003. And I'll get into that a little bit more here. I wrote down the teams who they beat Power 5 wise. And 2003, there were a lot of Power 5 wins for the MAC. Miami beat Northwestern. Marshall beat Kansas State. Well documented there. Bowling Green beat Purdue. Bowling Green beat Northwestern. Northern Illinois beat Maryland, Alabama, and Iowa State. And Toledo beat Pitt. That's all in 2003. And that year, they also had two teams finish ranked in the top 25 at the end of the year, Bowling Green and Miami, Ohio. Miami, Ohio finished 10th in the country that year. They were one-loss team. They lost a close game in their first game of the year to Northwestern, I think it was, like a very close game, and they won every other game and just beat the crap out of everybody. It had Ben Roethlisberger as a senior. So that year right there, out of all the years of the MAC and Conference USA post-realignment, I think that's the best year at all of them. I mean, that was a competitive, good conference at that point in time. And that was starting to get to the point where Marshall actually was showing signs of mortality after, because they had run the league for so many years. And that was a point where it's like, all right, this conference is catching up to them. And it did. It caught up to them.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question that, I don't know if you have an answer for. Think back to not counting any Marshall team, okay? Think back to the best MAC teams that you can remember, if any, from that MAC era, and put them against the best Conference USA team that you can remember, Marshall included, and play a, faux game in your head. So who produced the best team, do you think?
Ooh.
Who is that? Who's the matchup in your head that we're talking about right now?
Well, are you talking like best from each era?
No, yeah, like the single best team, discounting that 99 Marshall team. Okay. Pick any other MAC team from 97 through 03. Okay. Right? Who would that be?
Okay, so will their opponent be the best that we perceive out of this Conference USA?
Yes.
Okay.
From your same time frame, from 2014 to 2019.
Yeah. Okay, so if I was to say just one, I would probably say 03 Miami, but there were some other really good teams. Like I said to you all in a group text, this is one of the most mind-boggling things I've ever seen in my life. The fact that Northern Illinois in 2003 went 10-2 with 3 Power 5 wins, 2 against ranked teams at the time. They beat Maryland, they beat Alabama, they beat Iowa State. Northern Illinois did not play in a bowl game that year. They were not invited to a bowl game. Are you freaking kidding me?
Ultimate snub. I don't want to hear your crap when you go 7-5 and get left out of a bowl game when Northern Illinois has the ultimate freaking gripe of all time. They beat Alabama.
They beat Alabama. But I don't. Yeah, now, like I said, I think I would. If I had to say one team, I'd probably say 03 Miami. But 98 Miami was 10-1. 2000 Toledo was 10-1, and they missed out on bowl games too. Both of them 10-1, missed out on bowl games.
So I'm saying, if you had to rank out, the only team you can't pick for this scenario is the 99 Marshall team. So any other Marshall team, any other MAC team, period. If you're ranking the best teams out of the MAC from that era, who's that number one team? Is it the 03 Miami team?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay,
because, I think it
so
is.
Who is the best team out of the Conference USA between 2014 and 2019, period? All teams considered.
Probably Marshall 14.
Okay, so you pit 2003 Miami against 2014 Marshall. Who wins that game?
That's a heavyweight showdown right there.
Neutral field. We're not playing in Oxford. We're not playing in Huntington. This is a neutral, like a bowl game. Okay, It's like a bowl game. You get those two teams together in a, ideal situation, no rain, no high wind, no nothing that favors anybody else. It's sunny and 75, crowd is 50-50 split. Nobody's got any freaking advantage whatsoever. It's just two teams that's going to have to line up and go at it.
Well, I don't know Miami's personnel at that time very well outside of Ben Roethlisberger, but I think that's what kind of tips it in their favor. And maybe, we know Marshall 2014 was an extremely complete football team, and we know they had a dynamic quarterback and a dynamic offense and playmakers all over the field on both sides of the ball. But Ben Roethlisberger as a senior, oh my gosh, he was lethal. Absolutely unstoppable in mid-major in the MAC, any kind of mid-major conference. Nobody had an answer for him that year. And we saw what Brandon Doughty did to Marshall in 2014. Ben Roethlisberger is better than Brandon Doughty. Sorry.
Well, you're going to have to take into account. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the job that Doughty did because, it's not his job to play defense. But Rakeem Cato goes out there and throws 4 picks. So in order for that to happen again, get numbers, Roethlisberger to put up numbers like Doughty put up, they're going to have to give him Miami 4 extra possessions potentially, and I just don't know if that would happen. Now, how well could Miami, Ohio's offensive line handle Marshall's defensive line and linebackers? Who knows? Because I don't want Neville Hewitt running at me. I don't want some of those other guys making waves towards my quarterback, but there's not much you can do about that if you can't block them. Do you think that Miami's defensive backs could hold Rakeem Cato and Tommy Schuler and Devontae Allen in check? I don't know.
I was trying to look up Miami from that year a little bit more just to try to get a better idea, and I'm looking at their schedule. And their first game of the year, they lost to Iowa on the road, 21-3. But the next week, they went to Northwestern, blew them out by 30 points, 44-14. And then they ran off. They didn't lose again. They literally did not lose the rest of the season. They have wins of 41-21, 45-20, 59-3, 49-3, 38-10, 45-6 over Marshall, 56-21. They beat Louisville in a bowl game by 21. This was a 45-point a game offense. It sounds like. And they beat Bowling Green, who in the MAC championship, and Bowling Green at the time was ranked 23rd in the country. They beat them 49-27.
Wow.
That team was good, really good.
Yeah. So that's tough. So that you take the single best team out of the MAC and you match them up against the single best team in your opinion against the Conference USA, and you still think the MAC team could win that game in could be potentially fairly easy fashion, because it doesn't sound like you are afforded the opportunity to turn the ball over against that Miami team and stay in the game. So, I think if Marshall 2014 played at their quote unquote best, I think they could definitely win the game. But we know Marshall always has a couple games where it's just like, what are they doing out there? Every year, forever, it's what they do. They're going to have a 5 turnover game, or they're going to have a game where they forget how to play defense. And if you had any semblance of that against that 03 Miami team, you are freaking toast, buddy. It's over. Well, it's, and that's one of the frustrating things that I hear the most from Herd fans is that they can see that game coming on the horizon. And a lot of them can circle it, not necessarily at the beginning of the season, but after the season starts playing itself out and the scenarios start to present themselves and they're like, all right, we need to do this, this, and this in order to achieve our goal. Then they'll zero in on that one game where they all think, all right, this is the one. If they can get past this one, then we're good. And that's the biggest gripe, is because they ultimately, something goes awry and Marshall doesn't, win the one they were supposed to. And of course we all look back at this past season and we say, it's Charlotte. It's Charlotte. That's the one that got away from them. And, you take care of business against Middle Tennessee and you don't even really have to worry about Charlotte. So earlier in the year, it was that one, but, the scenarios continued to play out and you're like, okay, all we need to do is win against Charlotte and we've got this. And it just didn't work out, So it seems like that's one of the hallmarks of that Marshall era teams in the MAC, is when they stared down that one must win, we got to get this one game, that by and large they did get that one. that opportunity didn't slide by as often.
2002 Miami, Ohio game, they literally don't have Byron Leftwich on a national TV ESPN game. They have a backup quarterback making his first start in God knows how long. They win the game. I mean, if that was now, it'd probably be over before the game even started. I mean, think about the last time Marshall had to go in and fill in a quarterback after Isaiah Green got hurt in that Western game a couple years ago. They put Alex Thompson in. They lose to Middle Tennessee, and they couldn't do hardly anything. I mean, it's just a difference. I mean, that's what my whole thing with the MAC versus Coverage USA debate wasn't about necessarily Marshall, and it was just about the overall conferences because, I mean, we've said it both. I mean, there's no comparison about how Marshall coached then and developed players then compared to now. I mean, there's no comparison.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lot of player development going on in the MAC days, and that's evidenced by the fact that there were a larger number of draft picks coming out of Marshall. I mean, that doesn't lie. You can't say, well, that's not true, because it is. Marshall had more draft picks going to the NFL.
Way more.
And the NFL has never lowered its standard, for players. They want players. I mean, if you can play, they want you. Yep. So they're not going to be like, well, you can kind of play, but you came from Marshall, so we'll take you. That's not how it works. There's a lot of money on the line in the NFL, and they want wins. Wins. Nothing else matters. I mean, Al Davis, for all Al Davis was, he has the finest mantra in sports, and it's just win, baby. That's what it's all about. Just win.
You play to win the game.
Hello. You don't play to play.
No.
That'll never get old, man.
Herm
Edwards, I love it. I love that guy. That was an interesting little synopsis, Trace. I'm interested to what our listeners think about that. Whenever you get around to listening to this episode, if you make it this far, we're almost 55 minutes in. If you've made it this far, and when you get a chance, tweet at us and tell us what you think about the MAC era versus the Conference USA era. Not just Marshall teams, but the conferences as a whole. All of it, really. Did you think Marshall fielded better teams top to bottom? Did you think they played against better teams top to bottom? I mean, tell us what you think, because, we like to hear where everybody's mind is at when we talk about this stuff.
Hey, and I'm sure with more quarantine thoughts that I'll get in my mind, I'm sure it'll be some good podcast material. So just hold out hope. You probably got some more coming.
Well, and to that end, if you have something on your mind that you have wished we would cover, or something interesting you think might make for a good podcast episode, you should also tweet that at Steven or at Trace or at myself. Yeah. And if that's something that we think we can pull together and make a good argument or make a good discussion out of, we will absolutely do it. I mean, it's, that's one of the best things about doing this podcast. We can do whatever the heck we want. So we can talk about whatever we want. We just generally keep to sports.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, interesting debate. Congratulations to all these guys that got drafted. Amari Cobb signing his undrafted free agent deal. We're really, really hoping that some more guys get that phone call and get that opportunity, because we know firsthand that some guys are sitting at home right now waiting on that, and teams are missing out on quality players. There are guys that could be multi-year starters in the NFL that I have not seen an announcement getting, made yet. So hold out, keep on keeping on, guys. Hopefully your opportunity will come, and then, like I said, whenever it does come, just get something on film to show those other teams. Trace, you got some final words for us this week? We'll get the heck out of here.
Yeah, I mean, ditto what you just said. I mean, big ups and congratulations and kudos to the Marshall guys that got drafted, Justin Worldwasser and Chris Jackson. I mean, awesome moments. I mean, I'm sure never have ever been an athlete of any serious kind, so I wouldn't have a clue. But I could imagine, I mean, the feeling of getting drafted, it just has to be amazing. I mean, it's just like, that's what you want to do with your life, and then you get drafted to the NFL, and you have a chance to go out there and make millions of dollars now. And that's what you call that, the American dream. I don't know if that's what you want to call it, but no, I mean that's about as good as it gets. Getting paid millions of dollars potentially to do what you love to do. Can't ask for much more than that. So big congrats to them. Hopefully those other guys we talked about get chances. I liked the I liked our little debate there. I've just been watching a lot of old Marshall games. I mean, I have a thread on Twitter. I have a thread on Twitter every time I take a picture of the game I'm watching. I'll just write sports because that's the only sports we get. That's it. That's all we get. So I've been listening to a lot of Keith Morehouse and Sonny Randall, which is never a bad thing. But no, I mean, which I love watching the old stuff anyways. I always do. I have a lot of games and stuff on DVD and so forth. So I always like doing that, but especially now since, I mean, there's just no sports to be found. You cherish that stuff more. So yeah, pretty awesome. DVR and the most recent two, Last Dance parts. I'm going to watch them coming up. I'm pumped for that. So let's go. I'm ready for that.
Well, that's all my timeline has been full of. As we've been podcasting, I've been making sure I haven't missed an announcement of somebody signing a deal. So I wanted to get that in if I had seen something. So I haven't, but, yeah, I tell you what, this is a perfect opportunity since everybody is at home and they're bored to tears. And you know what? We've got access to more media than we've ever had ever. So there is nothing stopping younger fans from going back and watching, the old Western games, basketball games and football games, or Marshall fans from go finding old clips. I mean, you hear us talk about older players that you've probably never heard of on Twitter or on this podcast, and you can go watch some of those older games, turn the volume up, put your headphones in and listen, and you'll see who some of those people are that we talk about. And believe me, Marshall has some gamers that could play today. And don't think that just because they played 20 years ago that they wouldn't be able to make it on this Marshall team. Let me tell you, they could play right now if they were coming up, and as freshman, junior, senior, sophomore, whatever, they could play, and the Herd would not miss a beat. So just don't think because somebody might be your dad's age now that they didn't also play. I mean, hey, Randy Moss is 40-something, and you don't think that dude was he was awesome. I mean,
he could burn you right now.
So he had teammates, you know what I'm saying? So go check them out. Go see what some of these guys are all about. And another thing I'll say is, if you're not diving deep into older music right now, this is totally off topic. This is absolutely a great time to explore some old music that you have never heard of, because I've lately here in Tampa, I've been listening to more of the just like, I don't want to call it a pop station, but it's like just today's music. It's all genres really. And some of this stuff I'm hearing sounds so eerily similar to songs from the 80s and 90s. And I'm like, this is not a new sound. This is a very old sound, but it's still good. So I'm reminded, I heard this song, I know it's been out for a while. I've heard it many, 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 many times. That song by The Weeknd, and I think what's it called? Oh man, what is that song called? It's something I can't think of what it's called. I'm gonna sound really stupid because I should know this. Let me look it up.
I've probably heard it. I just don't know any other titles, any other songs.
Yeah, it's. Oh my God, what is that called? It is called "Blinding Lights." That's such an 80s riff, man. I mean, that sounds so 80s.
Well, that's the problem with like music now. A problem, or if you want to call it a problem, is that everything's been done. Literally everything has been done music-wise. I mean, when's the last time you've heard a new song that's genuinely like unique and different and a one of a kind? Like, everything's been done. Every riff, every arrangement, every melody, it's all been done in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it's all just regurgitated stuff, but this is supposed to be new and cutting edge sound.
It's not cutting edge at all. And
do you know what song I'm talking about?
Not by the title, but I'm sure I've heard it.
You have to have, because it is so quintessentially an 80s sound. Yeah. It's like if you would have put that on Billboard in 1987, you'd be like, fits right in. Yeah. Fits right in. And it's amazing because some of the youth of America are like, wow, this is such a new cutting edge sound. This is new music and this is awesome. And it is awesome. But what I'm saying is explore that sound when it was new in the 80s. There is a ton of killer music in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s that are long before a lot of kids were born, And I remember when I was in high school, that was the time that I started to really explore older music, the stuff that was cool when my dad was a kid. Yeah. And, now I have kids that my oldest is in high school, and he couldn't care less about older music.
Oh,
and
man.
When I explain things to him, like he likes hip hop and that's cool, but when I like hip hop too. And I say, hey, you do realize that some of the people that influenced the guys you like are guys that I grew up on, right? Yep. And so you should explore those artists as well to see how things evolved into what you like now. So yep. I just find that to be incredibly odd that he doesn't want to, listen to older stuff. Sometimes I'll have him in the car and I'll turn on like a 90s hip hop Pandora channel or Spotify or something like that. And he's like, this stuff is very aggressive.
Very aggressive.
Yeah. He's like, this is very like hateful. I'm like, well, I mean, it was just the time, it was just the time. It was
with me. Yeah. With me though, with music, like my whole thing always has been, I grew up with the classic rock and classic stuff. I grew up with that because like that's what I heard all in my life basically, because my dad played in a lot of cover bands and stuff. I learned so many songs from that. I learned so many songs from the Guitar Hero games in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Those I have said this numerous times. There needs to be a game like that now, because not only did it teach you and introduce you to so much great music, it gave you some type of practice on a guitar. Now, it's not obviously the same thing, but like you at least could get the rhythm down a little bit and like, use some of the techniques a little bit to play it. And like those games weren't just games. Like they were actually kind of almost educational in ways. And like I learned so much music from those games. And like I don't think kids now have that.
Yeah, I remember there was a game that was called like Guitar or something, and it came with an actual guitar like with strings, and it was essentially you could learn how to play guitar by playing that, that game. But yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about Guitar Hero, and I remember they had Rock Band for a hot minute.
Yeah,
and I don't know. I was just like I said, quarantine thoughts. Right?
That's right.
Explore things that you otherwise wouldn't. Find old football players and watch film. The guys you hear, your uncles talk about, or your dad talk about, or whatever, or even your grandpa. Really, go watch film on dudes like Earl Campbell.
Yeah,
you're like, whoa, this dude was a legit back. Yeah, no kidding. It's like running back did not just evolve. Like Adrian Peterson didn't just show up and become a running back. Like there were guys before him that were unreal. You know what I mean? Like there were wide receivers before Jerry Rice that people probably don't pay enough attention to. Guys that are older than me do, because that's who were the stars when they were kids. Guys like Lance Allworth and Steve Largent. Those are Hall of Fame players. Go back and look at defensive players like Steve Atwater. These are guys that will take your freaking head off. Yeah. Stuff that you couldn't even dream of getting away with in today's NFL. Would not happen. But there are plenty of film out there on these older players that will probably blow your mind. And you'll be like, wow, no wonder they compare dudes like Patrick Mahomes to, such and such quarterback or such and such whatever. Because they were ballers, man. They just happened to play in the 80s or earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to see a boss group of wide receivers, maybe the most boss group of receivers that Marshall's ever had, watch Marshall in 2001 and 2002. You just watch them. The group of receivers they had then, I think that's the best they've ever had. And I'm talking even the Pennington days. The group of receivers the Leftwich had, Denaro Marriott, Josh Davis, Darius Watts, Demetrius Doss, Curtis Jones, guys like that. They were absolute studs. I mean, and it helped having an all-world quarterback, but those guys were absolute beasts. I mean, Josh Davis is like top 10 or 5 all-time NCAA in receptions. Darius Watts, another kind of just another guy that's just legendary in college football history and Marshall history. I mean, these guys were absolute ballers. And, I mean, they even – in 2002, they actually had almost all 3 of them almost were 1,000-yard receivers. All three of them almost. Like
Could
that.
You imagine that? Could you imagine that now?
No, you don't see that. I think they were like maybe like a couple yards short. One of them. It's just unfathomable to even think that. I mean, those receivers were awesome. So if you haven't watched any of the Marshall era at that time, some of those games are what you need to watch.
Yeah. But of course, that goes beyond Marshall as well. Just find some of these historical players that you might just keep hearing, like when you're watching the NFL Network or something, and they're talking about, well, he reminds me of such and such, or whatever, or this guy's now a commentator. Like everybody knows Deion Sanders is an analyst now. Go watch some Deion Sanders film. You know what I mean?
Oh man,
like that guy's legit. I mean, for a reason.
Coach.
Yeah, go watch guys like Eric Dickerson run the ball. I mean, I'm telling you, that you will be amazed at the amount of talent that existed before the internet. It is really kind of shocking. But anyway, we've been yammering on for about an hour and 10 minutes. Somehow the last 10 minutes got away from us, but hey, it is what it is. We answer to our own selves. So if this ends up having to be two separate episodes, one for the 20-minute draft part and the rest for the rest, then so be it. I don't really care.
Nah.
But anyway, let's get out of here this weekend. Hopefully we can have some more good news, and we'll be able to get Steven back in here, and we'll be able to talk some Western stuff here pretty soon. Because, right now it's just quarantine thoughts, man. So I'll be Steven this week and take us out. Until next week, we'll try to do better. Go Tops.
Go Herds, and quarantine and chill.
And wash your damn hands. Yep. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.